The reading this morning is by David Blanchard, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places. Most of us look for love in only the most obvious places, and as a result, most of us come away disappointed. It's as if we were still grade school kids, counting Valentines as a measure of what matters. The love that matters is not typically the subject of sonnets or love songs. There can be love in being told we are wrong. There can be love in sharing a regret. There can be love in asking for help. There can be love in communicating hurt. There can be love in telling hard truths. Most of us find it painful to live at this level of love, but it can be there, even in these most unlikely of places. It isn't the kind of love we've been promised in fairy tales of princes and fairy godmothers, but it is the kind experienced by frogs and dwarves. It's the sort of love that can bring us closer to finding the missing pieces in ourselves that we need to make us whole. Some of the most loving things I've ever experienced I haven't been ready for, wasn't looking for, and nearly didn't recognize. A few of them I didn't want. But all of them have changed me, transformed some part of me, filled in a place that I didn't even know was empty. When the Valentine has been tucked away in the drawer, the candy eaten, the flowers faded and gone, there will be other legacies of love that will last as long as we do, because they've brought us to know an element of life, part feeling, part idea, part mystery, that once known is ours to keep. You all know the story of Cinderella. Poor girl forced to do all the chores in the house, tough chores too, the floor hour after hour, the oven, even the rafters and their dust, persecuted by her evil stepmother and her even more evil stepsisters who were overempowered to torture her, suddenly transformed by a fairy godmother into the beautiful and highly desirable maiden who catches the eye of Prince Charming, and by good fortune her feet are exactly the size to fit in the glass slippers, and the prince realizes that this is his one and only true love. They go off in a blaze of glory and live happily ever after, cheered and adored by all. Yeah, right. Time went by and the glass slippers began to pinch Cinderella's feet. But Prince Charming insisted that she wear them all the time in memory of their first infatuation with one another. The castle, which was beautiful on the outside, was drafty on the inside, cold all the time, but the prince wouldn't hear of allowing Cinderella to bundle up in sweaters. He said it interfered with the edge of her beauty, which he so admired. And as a result, Cinderella lived in mortal fear of catching a cold, and she refused to leave the palace even when the bed was uncomfortable, because she could sense the presence of even such a slight distortion as a pea through the many layers of... Oh, sorry, that was a different fairy tale. The prince turned out to be exceedingly charming in small groups, but when he became king, he found that he was tongue-tied in public, so afraid of making a mistake that he remained mute in front of any crowd larger than 3 or 4 of his advisors. Their children were no bargain either. Their oldest daughter, Hermione, lived in mortal terror of fire, so she went all around the house, dousing the candles and the hearth fires, which only made Cinderella's fear of catching her death of cold more acute. Their son Henry, Harry as his friends called him, was a bit of a hellion, always getting into some sort of trouble or another, relighting all the candles and some extra ones in order to drive Hermione crazy, leaving doors open which let in all kinds of drafts, which in turn made Cinderella even more fearful. And swearing like a sailor in front of strangers, which bothered his father to no end. Where did he learn that? And the youngest daughter, Helen, was so mortified at how weird and eccentric her family was that she couldn't wait to get out of the house and forget the lot of them. You'll be happy to know that with a bit of family counseling and a new commitment to sawing off their own rough edges, they found new happiness. They didn't live happily ever after exactly, but at least they realized that happiness was in their own hands and not simply their fate. Not quite so happy an ending, but more practical on the whole. They learned that the journey of love is a very long journey. When I set out to prepare a couple for a wedding, one of my important tasks as a minister is to help them to explode the Cinderella Prince Charming myth and to let them in on the secret that married life is not actually a happy ever after bed of roses, or rather to remind them that roses come with thorns. In the throes of falling deeply in love, they don't necessarily want to hear this, or they deny that it applies to them, or they imagine that they will make up for all of the deficits of their parents' marriages, which they acknowledge fall short of their own high ideals and of their dreams for their lives together. I suggest to them that their relationship will, in time, suffer from what is known as the 7-year itch. It seems to be happening in about 2 years these days. They'll suddenly look around and realize that they find other people attractive, maybe more attractive to them than the partner to whom they've committed to live their lives. Is this what I've settled for? They may find themselves asking. Like Cinderella, they've imbibed a little too much of the Beatles line. All you need is love. It's easy, say the Beatles, which is true, sort of, by the way. It's true that all you need is love. It's just, it's not easy. The journey of love is a very long journey. As it turns out, we need more than falling in love to make a relationship that will last for a lifetime. Couples who stay together find that adjustments are necessary, and if they're wise, they recognize that each of them needs to make changes themselves to accommodate the person they marry, who is not quite the same as the person they thought they were marrying. And they have to give up on the idea of making the other person change. It seems that change only really comes from inside us. Skills of communication, a bit of selflessness end up being more important than whatever it was that drew them together initially. The glass slippers, the flattering clothes, beauty and charm, earning potential, whatever it was. Abiding love is something we do, not something that happens to us. Hafiz, the most beloved poem of Persia, whom Emerson called a poet for poets, wrote this in the 14th century about what makes love work. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole world. The light of our love makes beautiful that which we love. Of course, there are more types of love than those that lead to the bliss of lovers and of marriages. St. Valentine was a Christian priest martyred in the 4th century. And the various stories told about him to explain the origins of Valentine's Day illustrate several of these different kinds of love. One story has it that the emperor forbade young men to marry because single men made better soldiers. So Valentine arranged for secret marriages. This is an early instance of draft dodging by being married. And as a result was martyred. Surely an example of selfless love if you ever saw one. Another said that Valentine fell in love with his jailer's daughter, and priestly celibacy was not mandatory in those days. He wrote her a loving note, which he signed, "Your Valentine," as we do to this day. Still another story says that when Valentine was in prison, the children whom he had taught and who loved him very much were so heartbroken that they wrote little missives and threw them over the wall of the jail for him, each of them addressed to my Valentine. I'm not sure when the diamonds and chocolates came into the story. All of these kinds of love have also, as one outcome, falling out of love. Think of the moment when a child is born and we feel an overwhelming love for this new being. And after, give or take something like 2 years, the beloved child begins to develop a will of its own, and the parents become a little less naive about their undying and unconditional love for their toddler. And then a little later, there's that wonderful stage when kids start to tell their parents, "I love you," out loud. Let me ask you, how many of you wrote your first Valentine to your mother? Anyone? I guess that came into the schools after you and our kids, were all taught to write Valentines to their parents, and how wonderful to be the mother or father receiving such a Valentine. The journey of love is a very long journey. And then if we're fortunate as parents, our children may grow up at last and come to understand that what it was their parents were up against is what they're up against with their own children, and all the utterly irrational things that their parents had done suddenly became not only plausible, but even occasionally wise. I remember visiting my family in Wisconsin when when our youngest son was about 6. We were at a state park. We were climbing to the top of a watchtower on the top of a hill that looked out onto the plains when our son Sean threw a bit of a temper tantrum. So we worked it out together and made our way up to the top. And my father leaned over quietly and said, "Well, now you see what it was like to take care of you when you were his age." And much as it pained me, I had to admit that he was right. It began to seem he hadn't done such a terrible job of bringing me up as I had sometimes thought. It seems that every generation of parents has to struggle to learn how to teach our children well, as the Crosby, Stills, and Nash song has it. We swing back and forth between too much authority and too much liberty. We determine not to repeat our parents' mistakes, only to discover that sometimes those are wise choices, and sometimes we do it without even realizing that we're doing it. Any of us who are tempted to ignore discipline in the name of love have learned that indulgence is quite distinct from love, and that real parental love must sometimes be firmer than feels quite easy to us. My family maybe was a little too literal in applying the advice of Proverbs. Those who spare the rod hate their children, and those who love them are diligent to discipline them, more often shortened to spare the rod and spoil the child. But all wise parents recognize that good discipline is essential to raising happy children. Sparing children the need to obey rules makes for unhappy children and unhappy families. Then parental love is often pushed to the limit when our children become adolescents. Our affection for them begins to wane again, or at least be tempered, and their affection for us seems to be non-existent, as it seems we can't do anything whatsoever in this world right at all. Maybe all that Sturm und Drang is turning us into parent birds who serve their nestlings best by ejecting them from the nest and forcing them to try out their own wings. It may be a kind of love, but it can be very trying when we're in the middle of it. And then there's the aching love-hate between siblings. I suspect I'm not the only parent whose children are, at least at the moment, estranged from one another. The journey of love is a very long journey. Many of us stop going to church in high school or college. You may share my family's experience of being drawn back when our children began to ask the hard questions that we were at somewhat of a loss to answer. If we're fortunate, we could come to love the congregation that we've joined. Many of us have come to feel that at last we are at home in a community of like-minded people with whom we can share things in our lives we could never share before. As our opening words put it, we come to love a church, this beautiful meeting house, a place to link together the generations in this beautiful, imperfect, loving, and blessed community of memory and hope. And then we discover that even in these sacred precincts, there are always a few difficult people who rub us the wrong way, just like in any family or home. And again, we learn that loving is something we do, not something that just happens to us. The journey of love is a very long journey. We come to be lovable because we are loved. Someone in our lives, parents, siblings, teachers, mentors, has given us the experience of being loved so that we in turn can love. The poet Hafiz puts it like this: how did the rose ever open its heart and give the world all its beauty? It felt the encouragement of light against its being. Otherwise, we all remain too frightened. The light of our love makes beautiful that which we love. And then it would have to be so. If our families have taught us well, we learn to love and be loved outside our families. Mary Oliver puts it this way: I've been in love more times than one, thank the Lord. Sometimes it was lasting, whether active or not. Sometimes it was all but ephemeral, maybe only an afternoon, but not less real for that. They stay in my mind, these beautiful people, or anyway, people beautiful to me, of which there are so many. You, and you, and you, whom I had the fortune to meet or maybe missed. Love, love, love. It was the core of my life, from which, of course, comes the word for heart. And oh, have I mentioned that some of them were men and some were women and some, now carry my revelation with you, were trees or places or music flying above the names of its makers, or clouds, or the sun, which was the first and the best and the most loyal for certain, who looked so faithfully into my eyes every morning. So I imagine such love of the world, its fervency, its shining, its innocence and hunger to give of itself. I imagine this is how it began. The light of our loves makes beautiful that which we love. And always we will lose that which we love. Those we love will leave us. Our children will move away and begin the cycle all over again. Our partners die and the grief is unbearable. Friends come and go. The trees we loved lose their luster. The journey of love is a very long journey. But what makes the long journey worthwhile is the love that we receive and especially the love we give. Each act of love, of caring, of kindness is a gift we give here on earth that makes our lives worthwhile. From the moment a child is born until the moment we die, love in all its many forms, all of its splendors, its ups and downs, its joys and disappointments, love found, love lost, love found again. Love is the fuel of our living. And love never says, you owe me. Maybe this line from the Beatles is more accurate than the other one. And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. Let's remember to love each day, this day. Robert Weston puts it this way in his meditation: this day, setting aside all that divides me from others, this day, remembering that the world is beautiful to him who is willing that it be so, and that with an open, eager heart the beauty enters in if love be there. This day I will make a part of the song of life. There may be grief, but if there be love, it will be overcome. There may be pain, but it can be borne with dignity and courage. There may be difficulty, but it can be turned to strength. Remembering that the world is beautiful, if I will let it be so for others whom I meet, this day I will make part of the song of life. May it be ever so, and blessed be.